I was pretty shocked. Not only did the founders speculate about alien life, but there's actually some pretty old UFO reports that Thomas Jefferson received. It really sounds like things out of a sci-fi movie, things that some of the whistleblowers have talked about today. One of the UFO reports that he gets describes an object that was the size of a house. This object basically hovered over the ground and actually crashed. In this detailed report that was given to Jefferson, there was actually a drawing. It was called Plate 5, and it was attached to the letter. Now, why is it that the drawing of the object is not attached to that particular letter?
Welcome to the War Room. I'm Kyle. Thank you for joining me on The Word at War. So my guest today is author and speaker Tyler Gilreath. A passionate Bible researcher, compelling writer, and dynamic speaker, he is the author of Gospel Over Gods, Gates of the Gods, and The Liberty Code, works that explore deep theological and historical themes. It's his latest book that we are going to talk about today, The Liberty Code, How the Founders' Secret Writings Exposed the UFO Agenda and the Coming Alien Crisis. The book uncovers the shocking connections between America's founding fathers and the mysteries of alien life. In this groundbreaking work, Tyler unearths the historical evidence that early presidents like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson knew far more about UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence than we have been told. Tyler, thanks so much for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.
Kyle, I appreciate the invitation to join you and jump on this podcast to talk about a very timely topic. I don't think we could always have said that about the UFO topic, but truly, we are living in unprecedented times where new information about the UAP phenomenon is really coming at us faster than we can process at times. So it's an honor.
Yeah, man, for sure and for certain. That's really kind of where I wanted to start off our conversation today. You did such a wonderful job in the book of kind of weaving this tapestry of where we are today to kind of start off, but then rewinding a little bit. And I want to kind of follow that path today because I do believe we live in an unprecedented times. I know from my age group and from my age and vantage point, watching the progression from when I was a kid, and if you dared to talk about UFOs, aliens, you were basically labeled a conspiracy theorist nut wackadoo, right?
Right, sure.
To where we are today, where this is pretty much widely accepted is, yeah, there's something going on. And I think for the most part, it's more accepted now to talk about. And when you look at where we are from a disclosure standpoint and where you kind of start off in the book, is you really lead off with the 2023, I believe it was a Senate hearing, on UAPs and kind of this whole topic with three people, all military, having, resumes, experience. They're not crazy people, and have been involved with, flying F-18 fighter jets and deep within kind of the defense portion of our country. And that was the three gentlemen were Ryan Graves, David Fravor, and David Grush. So talk a little bit about that hearing and some of the things that you picked out of that, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're referencing the July 26, 2023 House Oversight Subcommittee on National Security. That was a bombshell of uh, really information coming out from three key whistleblowers. Like you said, you have David Grush, former intelligence official, whistleblower, who was tasked pretty much by Congress to uh, figure out what in the world is going on with UFOs. You have Ryan Graves, former Navy pilot. He's now the executive director of Americans for Safe Aerospace. And then you had David Fravor, who is the retired Navy commander, famously known for the 2004 USS Nimitz Tic Tac UAP encounter. And so, what we heard coming out of that uh, hearing was truly a landmark disclosure in its own right. And that got a lot of people's attention. I mean, it really, because again, these three witnesses were, in all intents and purposes, impeachable. Their skill set, their acumen, their resume, their security clearance. I mean, David Grush at one time was basically giving security briefings to President of the United States. So we're talking about high quality people, and all of them described basically the same thing, that there are things in our airspace that our government have known about for many years, and that people in the military, whether it's the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, they are encountering these objects pretty routinely off the coast of California, off the East Coast. David Grush specifically, over the period of about 2 or 3 years, interviewed over 40 witnesses, um, some of which worked in what he described as the legacy UAP program, this long-standing UFO program that was obfuscated to secrecy, and that we have been involved in a retrieval of downed craft UFOs, UAPs, and we have been reverse engineering them for decades. And so that was on the congressional record. That was really monumental. Now, following that hearing, there was another one on November 13th, 2024. This was a joint uh, subcommittee hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And in that hearing, you had other high level officials, such as Dr. Tim Gallaudet, who is the Rear Admiral retired for the U.S. Navy and CEO of Ocean STL Consulting. You had Luis Elizondo, who was the former director of ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. You had Michael Schellenberger, who is a investigative journalist in the know, and you had Michael Gold, who is a former NASA associate administrator for space policy and partnerships. And so that was also a pretty tremendous hearing, not as explosive as the first, but basically what we're talking about, Kyle, is that there are hearings and more hearings in the works. I believe there's one in September of 2025 planned, um, where now Congress, members of the Senate, the House are hearing whistleblower testimony that essentially asserts that we are not alone, that our government has been lying to us for 70 or 80 years, and that it is high time for the American people to know and understand what is going on.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things when I started digging into all this myself, and I kind of shared with you before we started recording today that my wife and I watched a ton of documentaries and a little bit of a UFO nerd, not from an obsessive perspective, but it is a fascination point. And one of the things that really stood out to me was Grush's testimony. Graves and Fravor, by that particular point, I think everybody was pretty familiar with the Tic Tac and some of the things that they had talked about. But Grush was explosive, because it was really through Grush that he acknowledged, much to what you just said, that we have long had these programs where it's been retrieval and reverse engineering. And coupled with that, what he really said was multi-decade. So this has been going on, not something that's been in the last 10, 15 years, but literally probably goes back decades, which fits perfectly when we rewind the clock, which is kind of where I want to go next. And we really look at how far back this goes. And we know we have Roswell in 47, but there are things that happened prior to that as well. And one of the things that you did in the book, which was so awesome, was you even rewound the clock back further than that, which I'd never heard anybody do before, taking it back to the founding fathers. And so before we get there, I guess one of the things I should have started off with to ask you was, How did you get into this? What was your fascination point from your perspective on digging into all this stuff?
I had written two previous books on the supernatural war of the Bible, one Gospel over Gods, one Gate of the Gods, and uh, I was kind of satisfied at that point. Maybe I wouldn't write again, right? After you have a writing project, it takes so much energy out of you. You're just like, okay, I can rest now. Um,
Amen.
but but the more that came out about this topic, the UFO topic, um, I truly wanted to get back to work and start investigating this UAP phenomenon from all angles. And what I had not seen done before, I had not seen anyone really investigate too much prior to 1947, the Roswell, uh, famous Roswell crash. Um, and I just wondered, how far back does this go? Now, me as a Christian, I have a biblical worldview. I frequently study ancient history, the pre-Diluvian world, post-Diluvian world. And so I'm used to looking back in history and trying to find, uh, bits and pieces of evidence and connecting the dots. And so I said, Congress is meeting now, the Senate, the House, they're talking about extraterrestrial intelligence. I wonder how far back this goes, right? And so I said, let me just investigate the origins of America and just see if I can dig up anything that has not really been brought to the surface before. And so I started digging, and I really didn't expect to find too much, to be honest with you, really anything at all. Um, but I was pretty shocked that not only uh, did the founders speculate about alien life, but there's actually some pretty old UFO reports that Thomas Jefferson received. And so that I really, again, started digging in and trying to complete this historical narrative, uh, which is there, which has been there all along, but no one's really talking about it because, I think what our government would want us to know and think and believe is that the topic of aliens and UFOs is a byproduct of the creative genius of Steven Spielberg or some
Yeah.
other Hollywood director, and that we are all just latching on to something that we find so fascinating and we get obsessed with, but there's really nothing here to actually, you know, measure or quantify. Um, that was not the case in my investigation into this topic. In fact, it was quite the opposite. So much so that much of what we see in the movies is being directed and nudged by our government. Uh, in fact, there's a movie coming out in the near future by Steven Spielberg called Disclosure. I'm very interested in what may be disclosed, not only cinematically, creatively, but actually historically. Like, what are we actually going to get? Some level of disclosure in this Hollywood movie, a soft disclosure, or at least a thought or an impression made upon anyone who watches it. Um, that was the case with the recent movie Elio from Disney about this young boy that gets abducted because he wants to be abducted. He reaches out into the heavens and invites alien visitors to take him away from
Yeah.
human civilization, which is not kind to him. And so at the end of that movie, basically there is that serious moment where they are really getting us to think, we're not alone in this universe. Um, so having said all that, what I found in my investigation is that this topic goes back much further than 1947 in America by the founding fathers. And I'll be glad to unpack some of that if you'd like.
Yeah, actually, that's exactly where I was going to go next. Before we do that, I just want to say, one of the tantalizing things that you talked about, and we're going to get into this later in the conversation for anybody listening, is just how the disclosure is unraveling and how some of these entities like Hollywood and various others may be playing a part in the deliberate softening the blow, if you speak, or if you want to say, of the disclosure process. So we're going to get to that a little bit later in the discussion, but let's definitely focus on right now some of the things that you talked about as far as the founding fathers goes. Because again, I found this fascinating because we typically think from kind of Roswell forward. I think is really what the
Yeah, yeah,
UFO community mainly thinks of, right? Roswell forward.
right.
So you can go all the way back to George Washington and this story, if you want to start there, of him in the Valley Forge woods. So please do share that story if you would.
Yeah, yeah. So there is a legend, and this legend has been talked about before, I believe, on the History Channel. Um, and essentially, George Washington at Valley Forge uh, is overcome and overwhelmed with emotion, and uh, he gets visited by a divine being, uh, extraterrestrial being, what have you, um, a superior intellect is going on here, and this being shows him the future of America, the outcome of the war, and this emboldens Washington to move forward and to actually fulfill the destiny that he was shown by this visitor. And so, you know, this was a legend that started in the 1800s. It got passed around in basically a newspaper, and from there it just kind of took grew legs and uh, has been propagated over the years. Um, and that again is not necessarily considered historical. That is just a legend. And so I said,
Yeah.
well, we have this legend here. Is there anything concrete that we can definitely say happened? Something that we can say is tangible and is historical. And so the answer is yes. There was a founding father who passed away. His name was David Rittenhouse. Now, David
Mm.
Rittenhouse was not a well-known, um, patriot by any means compared to, Washington or Jefferson, but he was very important. Uh, he was tapped by Washington and Jefferson as being the first director of the U.S. Mint. So he was right there in the beginnings, with directing the money in America. He was also a personal friend of Washington. Washington would ask him on several occasions to make certain kind of uh, instruments, whether it be something for seeing better, or whether it be something for measuring land and dividing properties, as America was in the land business now. Right, we have to divide all this up. He was also an astronomer. Um, he was really one of a kind when it came to science, mathematics, and all kind of topics. He was also the president of the American Philosophical Society. Now, you probably never heard of that, but and I hadn't either. But it's pretty fascinating if you want to go down a separate rabbit hole. Essentially, it was the think tank of the day. It was uh, TED Talks on steroids. You
Yeah,
basically
right.
had, the brightest minds coming together to talk about all kind of various topics under the sun. And so he had died. Okay, and this was a big blow to America. And he died on June 26th, 1796. And so he needed to be celebrated for his accomplishments, his contributions to colonial America. And so the American Philosophical Society decided to have a celebration of life. And so they began to invite anybody who was important. You're talking about the Senate, the Congress, George Washington himself, foreign dignitaries also came to this eulogium. And the date was December 17th, 1796. You had in attendance, again, members such as Andrew Jackson, who would be, I believe, the seventh president of the United States. He at the time was the Tennessee representative. You had James Madison, who was the Virginia representative, who would be the fourth president of the United States. You had Aaron Burr, who would be vice president under Thomas Jefferson. And of course, George Washington himself, and undoubtedly his vice president, John Adams, who would be the second president of the United States. So I can't overstate who was in the room.
Yeah,
Um,
this wasn't just Joe Schmo off the street. This was
no,
a very well thought of,
exactly.
highly respected person.
Exactly. Highly respected person. So much so that they needed to provide ample time for people to travel from overseas, even to,
Yeah.
to make it to this event. Um, and so what happened is that, at this really monumental eulogium, you had Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was tapped with basically being the MC of the event. He was the one that was welcoming everybody, who was reflecting back upon the life of David Rittenhouse, and uh, really, really a brilliant man in his own right. And um, at this event, and by the way, we know what happened at this event because it is in the archive of the American Philosophical Society. Uh, the transcript is in the archive. Okay, so that's pretty unusual that we have a transcript that goes all the way back to 1796 from a public a public event such as this. So that's pretty remarkable. But
Yeah.
yeah, in this transcript, Dr. Benjamin Rush, he talked about his accomplishments of Rittenhouse, but then he got into what is really mind blowing: the thought train of, are we alone in the universe? Extraterrestrial life, extraterrestrial intelligence. And he began to read some of the writings and the musings of David Rittenhouse to George Washington, Andrew Jackson, uh, again, Aaron Burr, James Madison, John Adams, everybody who was there in attendance. And when I was reading this and I came across this, I thought, this is amazing. In fact, we have come full circle on this topic, because what we have now is we have the Congress and the Senate gathering together to talk about extraterrestrial life. And I thought, this has already
Yeah.
happened before. This happened in 1796. We have come full circle investigating this phenomenon, investigating this topic. Um, that idea and that reality is not being talked about anywhere that I've ever seen. I mean, this again, it's not like I went out and put a shovel in the ground and found an ancient tablet. I mean, this information is on the internet, is on the archive of the
Yeah.
American Philosophical Society, and nobody's talking about it. And I think that's really a travesty. But that discovery alone was pretty eye-opening, that this topic of extraterrestrial intelligence was indeed discussed on that day in a church building, by the way,
Yep.
all the way back in 1796.
It's kind of amazing when you think of it. I did when I was reading the book. I didn't really think of it from the perspective that you just came from, of the coming full circle aspect. Here that you have all of these founders of our country that formed our governmental structure, and it's really the government that is now flushing a lot of this stuff out of the weeds, or at least perceivingly flushing it out of the weeds. I think there's been a little bit of a natural friction point between some of our elected officials and the truth, and those who hold gatekeep the keys to the truth, if you will. And again, we're going to dive more into that here later in the conversation. But, having all of these people in attendance kind of highlights for you, or had to during the research process, of like, what else, is in written record that I can find where these guys are clearly talking about things. And you have writings that you share in the book from John Adams, who seemingly was very fascinated with the idea of extraterrestrials and, UFOs, common terms for us now, not necessarily the terms that they used at the time. But one of the most fascinating ones that I can only, think from your perspective of being a researcher and diving in and writing a book, had to be what you found in regards to Thomas Jefferson. And it was Jefferson reading out loud in front of a group the William Dunbar letter. So please do share that story if you would.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you basically have Jefferson, who obviously president of the United States. He would follow Benjamin Franklin and Rittenhouse, and he would also be the president of the American Philosophical Society as well. And
Mhm.
so he had a
Brilliant,
couple.
brilliant man.
Oh yeah, brilliant man.
Unbelievably brilliant man.
I put in the book. I think it was something like he studied when he was a kid. It was like 15 hours a day. Um,
Hmm.
you know, truly, truly brilliant man, like you said. And so he was not over his skis. Basically being the president of not only the country but the American Philosophical Society. But he had a
Hmm.
couple of UFO reports that came across his desk that were very intriguing. Um, it really sounds like things out of a sci-fi movie. It sounds like things that some of the whistleblowers have talked about today. Um, and basically, one of the UFO reports that he gets describes an object that was the size of a house, and this object basically, hovered over the ground. And if I'm not mistaken, that particular case, uh, the mysterious object actually crash landed, um, and in this detailed report from Jefferson that was given to Jefferson, and Jefferson read out loud. There was actually a drawing. It was called Plate Five, and it was attached
Hmm.
to the letter. Um, Now, this is where I started to get pretty skeptical. I mean, the American Philosophical Society has done a pretty good job of keeping records. Why is
Right.
it that the drawing of the object is not attached, to that particular letter? We can only speculate. Was it lost to time by chance, or was it, basically taken out at the behesting of the government that we do not want? We're okay with a letter, but we're not okay with a drawing of what was seen that particular day. So that particular case, there was no follow up that I could find uh, since this object crash landed. The letter talked about how the ground was broken up, um, and the earth was, scorched. Uh, and so some might say, well, maybe it was just a comet or a meteor or whatever. Um, but I went back and I started reading and expanding the archive in my mind of the American Philosophical Society, and I found plenty of instances where clearly they were talking about, you know, meteors, things like that, and those were identified as such and classified as such. This was not that. This was something that was totally off the radar, something totally different. And so, again, we don't know what they found because, at least at this current time in um my investigation into this, there was no follow up, a written follow up. I'm sure there was a follow up. It said there was a follow up, but there was no written follow up that I could find that would give us more indication on what exactly they found. And so that was one UFO report that came across Jefferson's desk. He had another one that was basically by two shipmen, two fishermen. I believe it was by Hansford and Clark. This was in the Portsmouth, Virginia area, and Edward Hansford was a tavern keeper, carpenter, harbor master for Norfolk and Portsmouth district in 1805. And John Clark was essentially a native of Newport, Rhode Island, and they had recently been, um, I guess, out on the seas or in work somewhere in that region of the country, um, when they came across a anomalous object that not only appeared to them, but it changed shape in the sky. Now, this is definitely we're not dealing with anything natural here, that can shape shift in the sky. I mean, that is not, natural by any means. We're definitely not mistaking a meteor or um, anything like that. So, what the letter describes by Hansford and Clark, written to Thomas Jefferson, is again that this object took on the form of a turtle. It took on the form of a Scottish Highlander, and really had no obvious explanation. Um, and so Jefferson, to my knowledge, didn't do anything with that report. He may have investigated it privately, but there's nothing in the public domain. There's nothing that we can say there was follow up to. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that letter is hanging up in his mansion, the Monticello Museum, on display. So again, I just wonder, as if I'm able to find this information, I'm able to dig this up. Why isn't this being talked about, in the Congress and the Senate today? Why is this not a part of the public dialogue? The fact that, you know, the first president of the United States, the second president of the United States, the third president of the United States,
Hmm.
all had some kind of either report or were sitting in a room when this topic was discussed. I think that is really a shame that that is not more known. And hopefully, through my book and being guest on podcast, hopefully more people can learn about that and know about that. But it's fascinating. It really is, man. This is um, again not supposition. This is not legend. This is fact, and that is why I wanted to put it in the book.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that all of these, supporting documents, if you will, the Plate 5 exhibit drawing, the follow up
Yeah,
investigations that are never mentioned, all of these things just seemingly are missing from the archives. But tantalizing evidence of some of these things are still there. And initially, when you read, especially the Louisiana event, it comes across like, oh, it's easy to dismiss of, oh, it's just a meteor. These guys know what meteors are. It's not like they're cave people and they've never seen a meteor before. These guys are brilliant. They're a room full of very intelligent people, so they know what these things are, and the behaviors of the objects are not operating like a meteor. So they're very familiar with this. So before I get to my next question,
exactly.
sorry, go ahead if you have more to add,
Yeah, let me
please.
just ju- let me just jump in here and say you're exactly right. Uh, David Rittenhouse was famous for observing the 1769 transit of Venus. That is how tuned in they were to what is happening in the skies and in space.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
let's not be ambiguous about that. You're exactly right. They knew what they were doing. I mean, they were brilliant, brilliant individuals.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So if you guys are enjoying this conversation, you are definitely going to want to pick up your copy of the Liberty Code. You can click the link on your screen. You can actually check the show notes, or you can head over to the website, thewordatwarmedia.com, and click on guests. I will have a tab set up for Tyler specifically over there with a copy, affiliate link copy of the book, where you can actually pick that up, help out him and the show. So do that. You will not be disappointed. Yeah. So the next place I really want to go with the conversation, Tyler, is I really want to fast forward a little bit up to the World War II time frame, because that really feels like when things started to quickly escalate as far as the UFO sightings, and then from that point on up until today, it's just seemingly gotten more and more compounded and worse as time has gone on. And there's a couple interesting things that you had mentioned in the book that I really wanted to dial into. One of the ones that I was not aware of that I found fascinating, actually was happening during the war, was a leaked memo from Roosevelt to George Marshall about being in possession of quote unquote material that could be used for, creation of a weapon to help end the war. So dive into that story, if you would, a little bit.
Yeah. So this was, essentially a alleged leaked memo, dated February 27th, 1942. And it was regarding, the recovering of celestial devices, right? That's a term that's pregnant with meaning, right? And so, um, essentially, and I don't mind reading the memo if you like me to do that, but um, essentially, it was just the acknowledgement he was, writing to, um, you know, George C. Marshall. Um, and here's what the memo said from Roosevelt. I have considered the disposition of the material in possession of the Army that may be of great significance toward the development of a super weapon of war. I disagree with the argument that such information should be shared with our ally, the Soviet Union. It's interesting he would say that because later, uh,
Hmm.
a young JFK would want to work with the Soviets. But consultation with Dr. Bush and other scientists on the issue of finding practical uses for the atomic secrets learned from the study of celestial devices precludes any further discussion, and I therefore authorize Dr. Bush to proceed with the project without further delay. The information is vital, he writes, to the nation's superiority and must remain with the confines of state secrets. Any further discussion on the matter will be restricted to General Donovan, Dr. Bush, the Secretary of War, and yourself. The challenge our nation faces is daunting and perilous. In this undertaking, I have committed the resources of the government towards the end. You have my assurance, he writes, that when circumstances are favorable and we are victorious, the Army will have the fruits of the research in exploring further applications of this new wonder. So that was interesting because you essentially have the acknowledgement of, you know, technological devices that are celestial in nature. In other words, they're not
Hmm.
from here, right? And so that was a very revolutionary thought. In our discussion so far, we have uh, talked of Washington and Adams and Jefferson and some UFO reports that hit Jefferson's desk. And now, as you said, fast forward years later, and now we are recovering celestial devices. And this is the early whispers of reverse engineering uh, this type of technology for national security purposes.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because, again, I've consider myself to be a little bit of a UFO nerd with my wife, and I was not aware
Yeah.
of this memo,
Yeah.
so it was kind of shocking to read. But this goes hand in hand with other things that we experienced during the war. Foo Fighters is the term that a lot of the fighter
Yeah.
pilots would use when they
Yeah.
would see unidentified craft. And then the other thing that happens is, we obviously everyone's very familiar with Roswell, but we have a couple other events that actually happened prior to Roswell. One of them being Cape Girardeau event. So, could you explain a little bit more about what happened in that event?
One of the earliest UFO occurrences happened, like you said, during Cape Girardeau, Missouri, in 1941. Now, again, a lot of this is, hearsay or documentation from family members. According to Charlotte Mann, which her grandfather was a Baptist minister, his name was William Huffman. He was called to the scene of what he believed to be was a plane crash. Instead, Huffman reported that there was a circular craft with three humanoid type beings. And this, again, a very, very mysterious account. Uh, Not surprising because, again, you have various UFO reports in and around this time period. But the credibility of the witness, I think that is probably where the story is. It would be uncommon, I would think, for a Baptist minister to just, make up some random UFO report that would not really be in the profile, of somebody holding that position. So that was again a very uh, credible sighting. As all of these in the book. I leave it up to the reader to determine their genuineness or not. But But when I was going through that case, kind of doing some study on it, I do remember thinking, man, okay, he was uh, a Baptist minister. Why would he, fabricate this story? If it were not so, that doesn't really, like I said, fit the profile. Um, and so yeah, so that happened again 6 years before the Roswell incident in 1947. And again, you have a couple incidents leading up to Roswell that were foundational. You have February 25th, 1942, as you mentioned, known as the Battle of Los Angeles,
Yeah.
where essentially you have the city that is plunged into darkness. The military is responding to what they believe is an aerial attack. Uh, they discharge 1,400 shells into the darkness, hoping to hit uh, their enemies. And essentially it's nothing, when the dust settles and they began to send up probes, or basically saying, is anybody there?
Yeah.
sending up
Right.
sending up planes and shooting into the air, and they realize there's nothing there. They're phantoms. And so that was a very mysterious. There's actually a sci-fi movie that was based on this event. It was called Battle of Los Angeles. I don't know if you've
I,
seen that or not, Kyle,
yeah.
but
Aaron Eckhart, I think, is the actor that's in there. I haven't seen the movie, but I know what you're referencing. Yeah. It's kind of more of a
yeah.
modern
So,
telling of the story, right?
oh yeah, yeah, definitely a modern telling, and a lot of creative license being used. But
Oh yeah. Always.
it was based upon that that mysterious event where we were being invaded, but yet couldn't really see our invaders. And so that was an event that really shook a lot of people in the nation. And so again, all those events are in the backdrop of that celestial device memo that I read from
Hmm.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so there was a lot happening in and around the 1940s leading up to what would then be Roswell. So yeah, pretty
Yeah.
fascinating.
It's kind of interesting because I think if I remember from what I read in the book, it seems like when the dust settles and the day dawns after the Battle of Los Angeles, they actually may have recovered something that they actually did shoot down, and that might have, like much to your point, kind of been the underpinnings of that memo that we just talked about. That was from Roosevelt to Marshall. So it's kind of
Exactly.
fascinating,
Yeah.
and then the next thing that really happens, we go through the war, we come out of the war, and we have Eisenhower. Truman, obviously, I think Truman's huge too from the standpoint of,
Oh, he
the
is.
bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talk about Truman a little bit and some of the things that kind of happened during his administration, how that was kind of a turning point for everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Truman was very important, especially when you get into the secrecy aspect of this topic, which at least early on, the presidents were in the know. Later on, that would not be the case. The book describes decades of various administrations trying to break through the secrecy veil that was really put in place during those Truman years, FDR, Truman, and Eisenhower years. But yeah, Harry S. Truman, he became president in 1945, and a lot would happen in UFO world during his presidency. You had the term coined "flying saucer" that happened near the Mount Rainier sightings in 1947,
Hmm.
um, where allegedly there were nine crescent-shaped crafts that appeared to be skipping like saucers on the horizon near Mount Rainier, and so that was a big event. Uh, and again, of course, you have as we've already alluded to, the famous or infamous Roswell crash of 1947, where uh, the Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release that they had recovered a flying disc, but quickly that was walked back,
Oh
and
yes.
they said, no, 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 nothing to see here. Uh, you know, Major Jesse Marcel and others,
Hmm.
they don't know what they're talking about. This is, a weather balloon, and here is the evidence of that. No, so let's move along, citizens. Nothing to see here. And so that was again during the Truman administration. And so, right out of the gate, we start to see the obfuscation of information
Yep.
uh, put in vaults, if you will. And that is really where the slandering and the disinformation um, and the debunking, the belittling really began to take place. Um, I wonder how things could have been different had they handled the Roswell incident differently. Had they come clean about what it was that they indeed recovered uh, in 1947 at Roswell, New Mexico, how would the UFO narrative be different? It would be extremely different. That was the blueprints for all of the UFO stories to be whisked away generations later.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, the Truman administration would continue to rock on, um, deny, deny, deny. There was the famous UFO incident in 1952, where on two separate weekends, July 19th and 20th, and July 26th through 27th, there were reports that UFOs were essentially buzzing the U.S. Capitol
Hmm.
over the White House. These objects were detected on radar, of course. They were tracked at both Washington National Airport and Andrew Air Force Base. Uh, the first incident began very late into the night on July 19th. It was 11:40, and it continued until 5:30 in the morning. The sightings that happened on July 26th started about 8:15 and lasted until about dawn.
Hmm.
And so uh, we're talking about hours and
Yeah, man.
hours, days that the U.S. Capitol was uh, basically the airspace was being impeded by unknowns or unknown flying objects.
Yeah, we
And
scrambled
so,
fighter jets and
yeah,
everything.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So we certainly tried to intercept the objects. We were not successful by any means. And so thousands of people witnessed these events, and including, you're talking about civilians, you're talking about military personnel. There was extensive photographs. There was extensive news coverage, of the event, and the panic began to set in the hearts of the public. And President Truman directed then General Robert B. Landry to contact the Pentagon on July
Hmm.
27th for detailed information um, concerning how that this event is spiraling out of control. And so there was a press conference held. It was by many believed to be one of the most important press conferences held since World War II. And the whole point was to alleviate public concern. And so, what they did in that press conference, uh, Air Force Generals John Sanford and Roger Ramey, they began to dismiss the sightings as unidentified stars, of all things. Um, radar anomalies caused by temperature inversions.
Hmm.
Um, and so, here we go once again. The public saw what they saw. There was even acknowledgement, and then shortly after, it is explained away as nothing but stars in the sky.
The
And so,
gaslight games continue.
that's right. The gaslight games continue, and this would lay the groundwork for the ultimate uh, swamp gas theory
Yeah,
in
Michigan. Yeah.
Project Blue Book in Michigan. So yeah, but all of these things were very, again, foundational, important when you talk about UFO history taking place again during the Truman administration. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
the seminal event is definitely Roswell, and I think not so much. It's well studied, well known, and all that. But I think the really thing that kind of goes unspoken a little bit, it goes back to what you said, is because at first, the first response was honesty. They're being honest with the news. They're releasing what they found. We found a craft, We found all this stuff. And very quickly, like much to your point, the government swoops in and goes, "Oh, no, no, no! Honesty will not be the way of the day. We're gonna hide this stuff." And again, to your point, that's the kickoff for the approach, really, even through today in a lot of ways. And we have all of these governmental programs. Is this kind of in the same time frame as the birth of Majestic 12? Kind of the behind the scenes study of all this, top secret, right? Isn't this kind of how this all gets going?
It is, yeah. You're referring to the ultimate secrecy group, the OG secrecy group of ufology.
Hmm.
Um, that you had this group, Majestic 12 or MJ 12,
Hmm.
Majestic and Jehovah is what the letters stand for. And there
Wasn't
was
that interesting? I didn't know
originally,
that.
oh yeah, 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 Majestic, Jehovah, and the 12 was emblematic of the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 apostles, etc.
Oh, wow, I didn't know
And
that.
so, yeah, so these group of 12 individuals, most of which were in the CIA, um, they saw themselves as the as important as some of the popularized biblical 12 numeric 12 groups in the Bible, such as again Israel or the apostles. In that they were guiding humanity in cosmic secrets, okay, or keeping us away from cosmic secrets.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and so, yeah, MJ 12 was essentially a branch of the CIA, like I said, to where they would be the keepers of the secrets and they would pull the strings. They would decide when or when they would not disclose what the government has about UFOs or non-human intelligence. Um, there's, in fact, memo after memo stating that even if they are asked directly by members of Congress, they are to not be transparent and honest. And only when America is attacked, or if and when America is attacked, or there is an aggression by a non-human intelligence, they would meet and decide if then they could disclose what they know. And so this is the original secrecy group that propagated, all the lies throughout the year, um, all the years, that have gone by, and we still have elements of this group present today. Now, they probably don't go by this name any longer. In
Yeah.
fact, you know, elements such as in the government, such as Lou Elizondo, who was the director of ATIP at
Hmm.
one time. He is now a whistleblower. He has a book out called Imminent. And in that book, Kyle, he describes kind of the modern version of this, at least one aspect of this. He calls them the Collins elite.
Hmm.
And he says they have a Christian worldview and that they believe that the phenomenon is demonic. And so they are trying to keep that knowledge out of the public domain. So undoubtedly, Majestic 12 would continue throughout the generations, president after president after president, and they are truly the keepers of the secrets. But it all started again in and around this time that we're talking about the Truman administration, FDR, Truman, and Eisenhower.
Yeah. Yeah, you have all these things and it kind of morphs through time. You have Project Blue Book, you have Project Grudge, which I believe Grudge was the reverse engineering, secrecy aspect of it. And I want to dive more into the modern disclosure stuff here in a minute, because he's fascinating to me. And I want to get your take on Elizondo, but that was one of the interesting things that I did read in the book. Again, I was not aware of was the Collins group, because you get into this in pretty good detail in the book. On you have this extremely powerful group that is Christian theology based, and here they're operating in secrecy and trying to keep everything away from the public. But the next thing that kind of leads us to the next big thing that is on the horizon from the time frame we're talking about is Eisenhower. Eisenhower's huge because it seems like to me, one, from reading the book, and two, just kind of studying myself and going through history, he's really the last president that seems to be really in the know, like deep in the know. Everybody else is
Yeah.
kind of, in and out a little bit, more kept at a distance. But, Eisenhower's huge because of some of the supposed things that happened during his administration. So dive into him, if you would, and share
Mhm.
some of those stories, please.
Yeah, I love Eisenhower. He's very interesting. Back home where I'm from, he visited the Chickamauga battlefield, not when he was president, but before as he was rising rather in the ranks of the army. So he has a military background. But there are a couple of legendary accounts, and I'll say them that way, regarding Eisenhower. His family, most of his family at least, uh, believes these were historical events where President Eisenhower actually met with, if you want to call them aliens or non-humans, on
Yeah.
two separate occasions. And so now we're seeing an advancement of contact. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're first we started out talking about Washington and you know Rittenhouse theoretically thinking about this topic, and then the private musings, right, of uh, John Adams, and then the UFO reports, Thomas Jefferson would receive, and then recovering celestial devices from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, um, and recovering bodies
Mm-hmm.
from the Truman or the Truman administration, and now here we are. Where do we go next? And so it seems there is an advancement in contact. Uh, Essentially, what happened, again, according to legend, is on February 20th, 1954, Eisenhower was supposedly enjoying a quiet vacation in Palm Springs when he was whisked away for several hours.
Yeah. For a
And
dental appointment,
it's
quote unquote.
for a dental appointment. That's right, of all
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
I got
Right.
to get that. Got to go to the dentist on my vacation.
Right.
Um, and so instead, allegedly, he went to Edwards Air Force Base, and it's believed that he met with extraterrestrial beings,
Mm.
specifically what is dubbed as Nordics. Okay, Nordics are very human-like, and so they're not the typical gray aliens that most people think of, but they have blonde hair, usually blue eyes, and they are very much human. Again, I have never met one that I know, so we are going based upon encounters people have and allegations made. So it was said that he met with these Nordics, and they essentially wanted him to um, denuclearize, to disarm, nuclear weapons, or we would face devastating consequences. But the story goes that Eisenhower did not agree to denuclearize. He was very much a war man and was always thinking in terms of national security. And so he did not do that. But um, that is the first meeting. Now, let me just say this. In some circles, some believe there was only one meeting. In other circles, there was two meetings. In the book, I flesh out both meetings.
Yeah, I was not
The
aware of the
second
second.
meeting,
I had heard of the first, but not the second, which was fascinating.
yeah, yeah, the second meeting would take place, I believe, a year later. We're talking 1954 or 1955. Um, and so he was on a hunting trip, apparently in Georgia, and made another secretive trip to Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. And witnesses claim that two UFOs were present on the airstrip that day, and that this time Eisenhower met with the Greys and not the Nordics. So now we're talking about an alleged different alien
Hmm.
race. These are the typical bulbous heads, large eyes that are ubiquitous in encounters that people
Mm-hmm.
have. And this was a different type meeting. Allegedly, uh, Eisenhower made an agreement known as the Greada agreement, where he allowed them to abduct a very minimal amount of humans, um, basically in exchange for peace. And so this is where we begin to see if that indeed did take place. We do see an escalation in uh, abductions, really from his administration moving forward. And so, um, again, those are the two separate accounts. Some say, oh, no, there's only one account, and uh, he agreed to the abductions in the first account. But it does seem like, at least from my research, there were two separate alleged accounts, and they both have some different details. So, just think about the implications of that, Kyle. If that
Yeah.
is indeed true, the fact that in the 1950s, the president of the United States met in secrecy with non-human intelligences and discussed human affairs. I mean, that is mind-blowing if that
Hmm.
is indeed true. And some of his family, again, to this day, says that indeed it is true. This did happen. And so, again, what would the world be like
Yeah.
if this was transparent in the 1950s? There is no telling. But uh, secrecy was, again, at the top of its game. And so a lot of this information began to leak out later on in the 1980s with the Majestic 12 documents.
Hmm.
And so that is how we know about a lot of these supposed events, because the secrets will find a way to get out. And so,
Always
yeah,
do.
I detail all that in the book. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, you think about it, from put yourself in that man's shoes, and it's like, and it makes a lot of sense too from the aspect of why, several presidents, I think, have wanted to kind of go down the disclosure road, and were either stopped. We're going to talk about that next, or I think realized that in order to be completely, totally honest and really talk about what was agreed to and the things that have been done, would probably be on shocking for most of us to actually hear, to confirm that, yes, your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, your son, your daughter, we allowed them to abduct them and conduct experiments. And, we have literally millions of people that have gone missing and no one knows where they are. We
Yeah.
have huge,
Yeah.
huge amounts of missing persons that just never get found. No body ever gets found, none of that. And you have to scratch your head and wonder how many of those are exactly due to this, which is kind of another terrifying thought. But the next thing that kind of happens before we get into modern day is the Kennedy administration. And if there was ever a president that did everything he could possibly do to make everyone mad to want to kill him, I think he was the guy. Not only do you have the attacking of all the secret agencies, all the three-letter agencies, and, coming right out and saying that he wanted to, splinter the CIA into a million pieces, or allegedly, either way, didn't make any moans about it. Went after the mafia that, elected him, got him in office. His dad was in bed with him for years. And, he sicks his brother on them when they get in office. And then the other thing that kind of never gets talked about, Bay of Pigs. But the one thing that doesn't get talked about is the UFO side. And you went into this in the book, which was also fascinating. And I want to just turn it over to you to dive into that a little bit more too, because it may have been one of the things, and maybe may have been the thing, that was the tipping point that ended up with him dying.
That's well said. Research has led me to believe, Kyle, that it was um, definitely one of the things, if not
Mm-hmm.
the thing, that tipped the dominoes to where the CIA uh, killed JFK. And all the documentation coming out now, um, since Trump has declassified a lot of the JFK stuff, it has only reinforced what I wrote before that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have essentially James Jesus Angleton, you know, who recruited Oswald and kept tabs on him for several years prior to the assassination and days before uh, JFK was assassinated. James Jesus Angleton which was the CIA counterintelligence spy master. Uh, he lowered the threat level of Oswald, which allowed Oswald to be in the vicinity of JFK. Now, that might just be as a patsy, as Oswald claimed, but nonetheless, it shows that the CIA was directing and pulling the strings when it comes
Hmm.
to the death of JFK. So let me unpack all of this and how it all works together and why it matters. So we're going to fast forward in time. You know, we're past the Eisenhower administration. Now we're 1961. There was a famous NATO UFO event where you had essentially some unknown objects. In fact, I think there was about 50 of them that were detected on radar moving from the Soviet Union towards Europe. Um, and everyone is freaking out because is this a missile? What is going
Yeah.
on? Are we under
Attack.
attack?
Hmm.
Yeah. And so just mysteriously, as these objects appeared, they disappeared over the Norwegian Sea. And this left JFK with a gut feeling that um, we are living in fragile times. And if ever there was a time for transparency, saying, this isn't us, we're not firing on you, now is the time, right? And so JFK, this was a wake up call for JFK. All right. So now fast forward to April of 1961, a few months later, the Bay of Pigs incident. The CIA, JFK, could not agree on American involvement in this fiasco. JFK did not want to give air support. The CIA did. It was an utter failure, an American failure. And so this drove a wedge between the CIA and JFK. Moving forward, June 4th, 1961, a couple months later, JFK, his antennas are up. He knows there's some things going on I don't agree with inside the executive branch, inside the CIA. He goes to the Vienna summit, June 4th, 1961. He meets with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev tells Kennedy things that are happening that he is unaware of in his own government.
Hmm.
One of which he is unaware of Operation Palladium. Operation Palladium was this secretive operation, again by the CIA, where we would spoof the Soviets' radar. We were planting false flags. We were making false UFO signals, if you will, on their radar in hopes that we could, lull them to sleep and send our U-2 spy planes into their airspace, and they would not think anything about it. Well, this was highly concerning for the President of the United States that the CIA was doing things that were so, could be detrimental to national security and world peace, and
Hmm.
he had no say in it.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was concerning. Now, a few days later, 24 days later, after he returned back from that Vienna summit, learned about Operation Palladium, Nikita Khrushchev, he wrote a letter to the head of the CIA, Alan Dulles, June 28th, 1961. He wrote a letter and said that he wants to know and be briefed on all things pertaining to psychological warfare, i.e., Operation Palladium, and MJ-12 plans, Majestic 12, the
Hmm.
UFO secrecy group. Now, for decades, this alleged letter was dismissed. However, we now know that indeed JFK met with Alan Dulles twice on this date because just a few years ago, Alan Dulles' diary entries and schedule, his calendar was declassified. And indeed, he met with him twice on this particular day. So this, in my mind, validates the credibility that
Mm-hmm.
this is a genuine, authentic letter. And the reason that he wanted to be briefed on Operation Palladium, MJ-12, is because he was forming a relationship with Nikita Khrushchev, and he wanted to have a transparent and ongoing space program with the Soviets. Okay, this was Kennedy's ultimate goal, and he wanted to even denuclearize the nations, both nations. The CIA didn't like the sound of either of those things. They did not want to denuclearize, and they certainly didn't want to work with the Soviets on some kind of space program. And so, again, he met with Allen Dulles twice on that day, June 28th, 1961. Um, Fast forward a couple of years later, November 12th, 1963, Allen Dulles is suddenly, he's gone. Why is he gone? He's been fired. Okay.
Yeah.
His tension with Kennedy uh, was too much, and he is gone. He's out of the picture, even though many believe he still pulled the strings after he was fired. Um, the new head of the CIA is John McCone. President Kennedy writes a letter to the CIA director, John McCone, and he wants to know and discuss the knowns and the unknowns. The unknowns were a term for UFOs back in that era. And the heading for the letter was he wants a classification review of all UFO files affecting national security. That's pretty significant.
Yep. I would
uh,
say.
he he wants complete transparency, not only for himself, but undoubtedly he wanted to be more transparent as a president
Mm-hmm.
for the American people. And so that letter was just a matter of days before he was assassinated. So what we see is JFK continuing to push the envelope with the CIA, both directors demanding answers about UFOs and what we know about UFOs. Now, the spy master I mentioned earlier, James Jesus Angleton, the counterintelligence head for several administrations, um, he eventually moved out of the CIA, and uh, there was an order to burn documents that was in his secret vault. And so one patriot, the story goes, pulled a document now known as the burned memo from the fire. We have a copy of that document. It is part of the Majestic 12 files. Um, and I talk about it in the book. But the reason why the burn memo is important is because the burn memo is essentially a smoking gun. It is a letter from, I believe it's from CIA Director John McCone, um, in fall of 1963, that basically states to the members of the Majestic 12 group that Lancer cannot be allowed to look into our matters any longer. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
reason that's important is because Lancer was the Secret Service name for John F. Kennedy. And
Mm-hmm.
so those are very condemning statements that they basically wanted to take him out, that he was to be unalived, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
not allowed to continue because he was pressing them on what they were holding secret regarding UFOs. And so that document is very, very condemning. And so bring it back full picture here, full circle. Again, the declassification of the files pertaining to President Kennedy really underlined that there was a fact pattern that is criminal. And the fact pattern basically points to the fact that the CIA killed JFK, and most likely because of what he wanted to know about UFOs.
Yeah. there's just so many things when you dig into that story, and you did a great job of outlining, several of them. But you have two competing factions, and unfortunately, what had happened by this particular point is the clandestine agencies had been allowed to run wild, and so they had immense power in the back channels, and had really developed a really strong infrastructure over the last 20 plus years. Because, the CIA was birthed after World War II, but it goes back to, even during the war and a little bit before the war, by its previous known name. And so this has been going on for a while. So it's really probably closer to 30 years. And yeah, you can just see the competing viewpoints here of honesty and denuclearization and treating Russia, trying to de-escalate things with Russia instead of treating them like an enemy, because everything the CIA wanted to do, and we could read this, we have all the documents that have been declassified, talk about Operation Northwoods, I believe it is, where they wanted to do false flag, airline hijacks and all kinds of stuff to make it look like it was Cuba so we could wipe out communism, because that's the whole mission, right, is to stamp out communism across the world before it ever takes root, hence Vietnam. And at the heart of evil communism is Russia. So he's doing all these things and wanting to work with the Russians, and they're not going to have it. So you just see everything culminate, and the UFO aspect is just one of those massive things, I'm sure, that, was the smoking gun or the final straw. But, it seemed like a lot of things have been set in place to, take him out of the equation. But no, undoubtedly, that didn't help matters any, which makes sense too for his brother. You have Bobby that comes along. He's going to be president. It looks like, for all intents and purposes, that's going to happen. He's going to continue the same things that his brother wanted to do. So we're not even going to let that even begin to happen. So they take him out. And then I think kind of Martin Luther King was just like, well, we've gotten used to it now. Why don't we just get rid of all of our problems at one time and kind of take him out as well? But it's really fascinating, man, the whole thing. The
It
next
is,
stop.
and
Go ahead.
yeah, and I'll say this too. You had Nixon, who
Hmm.
was pretty much on the phone with the CIA when he was president, acknowledging that he knows what happened to JFK, and um, but he himself was a little nervous, and he was scared about pushing the envelope on this because
Hmm.
even though there's things in the book I detail that are pretty fascinating, but um, there was a fear, I think, that crept in, and once the deep state got so locked in
Yeah.
and the
And
secrecy was so deep,
hmm.
it's really hard to penetrate, because you have a revolving door of presidents
Hmm.
every several years, 4 years at least, and they don't. The keepers of the secrets can stay in place. Their strategy can stay in place, and they can just wait out,
Yeah.
curious presidents.
Yeah. They just look at this particular point. They look at the president, and the members of Congress and the members of the Senate as civilians, and
Yeah.
civilians are not going to have access to these things. It's interesting though, because you do kind of see a little bit of variation throughout the years of some people maybe are given a little bit more information than others. But one of the things that seems to get you pretty much a line drawn through your name right out of the gate is if you are interested at all and you're really pushing for it, you are not going to get it. And that kind of takes us through the next few years. And Nixon is really the last one, it seems like to me, that actually had maybe some insider information. But that makes a lot of sense too, because he was pretty cozy with the CIA.
Yeah.
And he had a kind of hold Russia over the fire tactic, which gets into another insanely fascinating story. That's a whole nother show that I've actually done before, which is Project Azorian, where Russia tried to nuke Hawaii and blame it on China. And then, like I said, that's a whole nother thing. But, they run this secret CIA operation called Project Azorian, which everybody can go read about that too, to go and uncover a submarine from the bottom of the ocean to basically blackmail the Russians. So it's crazy. But, Carter was fascinated by UFOs. They wouldn't give him anything. Clinton was fascinated by UFOs. They wouldn't really give him anything. Reagan kind of talks about some things here and there and kind of makes an interesting statement at one of the, I want to say it was NATO. I
He
think it was one of
actually,
the NATO summits.
Yeah, he made that statement on several occasions, in
Yeah, and he
several
had had an
appearances.
encounter too in an aircraft. You know, he was flying places and had seen things. Obama was
Yeah.
interested, and all of them just basically get the door slammed in their face. Like, you are not going to get anything. You can forget about it. The next interesting one, and where we see the worm really start to turn and things really start to change, is Trump, which is it's crazy because you would think that he would be another one that would just have the line kind of drawn through his name. But actually, some of the things that we've kind of learned about this, or what we think may have happened based on some of the rumblings, is kind of fascinating. So dive into his first administration, and we'll kind of start there, if you would.
Yeah, yeah. Trump, in that election, you had Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton, it seems like she was going to be the disclosure president.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Bill Clinton had and John Podesta, they had really, pushed for UFO transparency and the knowledge getting out there. So many people thought that she would be the disclosure president. Ultimately, she didn't win. And then, Trump gets in the White House. There's a couple of things that, Trump said in several interviews early on. He was interviewed by uh, Don Jr., I believe,
Mm-hmm.
who is very interested in UFOs. This is his son, Donald Trump
Yeah.
Jr., um, and Eric Trump as well. And he basically said, "Are you going to tell us what happened to Roswell?" And Trump says, "Well, in the classic way, it's very interesting. What I know about Roswell is very interesting. I can't tell you everything, but it's very interesting, right? Very repetitive."
Yeah. Let me just break that down for everybody. There's a UFO that crashed. We got a hold of it, and we got a hold of bodies. That pretty much summarizes. That's probably there may be a few other little fine points in there that maybe we don't know, but that's
Yeah.
pretty much it. But anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, not a ton came out, during the first administration. I think COVID probably derailed if there were any major plans for
Yeah.
transparency. It really took the precedence, and so not a lot happened. Even though one thing I do in the book is I talk about the space agendas of various presidents and how that
Mm-hmm.
may or may not have to do with the knowledge, of other entities engaging with planet Earth. Um, but what really, I think, accelerated the whole disclosure movement was the 2017 uh, bombshell New York Times article by Leslie King and Blumenthal, or Ralph Blumenthal rather, about the secret government programs, ATIP, uh,
Mm-hmm.
which we now know is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was headed up by Lou Elizondo. Um, this was under the umbrella of OSAP, which was another bigger, you know, UFO studies program, and they would study places like Skinwalker Ranch,
I
in
want to say,
places of
sorry to interrupt
paranormal
you, but
activity. Yeah, no, go
I want
ahead.
to say OSAP was actually some of the basically using the information for weapons advancement. Isn't that kind of what some of that was for?
It was, yeah, yeah, it was Advanced Weapon Systems Application Program or
Something something.
something. I don't know. Yeah, something. But yeah, but they were definitely interested in UFOs. And one thing Lou Elizondo talked about is a program that they wanted to. The name slips my mind, but essentially they wanted to bait UFOs in the ocean, middle of the ocean, with
Mm.
aircraft carriers that had a large payload of nuclear material, and they wanted to bait them and shoot them out of the sky. So,
Oh wow.
um, yeah, that was recently declassified. That program, that aspect of the program, never actually happened, allegedly. But
I
yeah,
assume
there
I
was
assume
all kind
for
of
the
fascinating things.
purposes of recovery. I assume that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For
Yeah.
the purposes of recovery,
Okay.
reverse engineering, and so I said all that to say that in and around that time, when Trump comes on the scene, there is a lot of disclosure peripheral to him making statements. Um, and so that brings it to modern day. Um, what has happened with Donald Trump? Well, you have uh, Mr. Eshed, I believe his name was. He was essentially the Israeli guru for space, a very well respected individual that came out in the Jerusalem Times, I believe, a number of years ago, and said that, oh, yeah, Trump knows about the non humans. He knows about what he called the Galactic Federation, and that Trump was on the verge of disclosing this information to the
Yeah.
public. And he was persuaded to put it back in the box and to not move forward, that we were not ready for such a revelation. And so that was a bombshell allegation when it came out. And the reason is because this is not some nutcase. This is some highly respected, long tenured scientist who is world renowned and well respected that was making these allegations. Um, that brings us to now present day and the push for disclosure, what is happening now. Uh, it's interesting when Trump second term, I was very much paying attention to who he would put in his cabinet.
Hmm.
And it seems like that he was putting in people in his cabinet that were friendly to the UFO topic, at least on the public facing of it.
Yeah.
Um, you have individuals such as Marco Rubio, who is undoubtedly read in to much of the UFO secrecy that is in our government. He is high up in the Trump administration. You have J.D. Vance, who just a few weeks ago made a very provocative statement about UFOs. And he said, quote, "I am obsessed with UFOs."
Well, that's pretty blatant.
Um, that's pretty blatant. There is, to my knowledge, in my historical review, there's never been a president or vice president to say anything that blatant.
Yeah.
So obviously, he was friendly to the topic. Um, you have Tulsi Gabbard, who was interviewed also several days ago, and she said that she is not convinced that the drone fiasco that happened in New Jersey were indeed drones.
Hmm.
That was interesting. She is the
Yeah.
ODNI, Office of
Hmm.
Director of National Intelligence. She is pretty much in charge of all of national intelligence. And so she is one that has been disclosing information left and right, not necessarily about UFOs, but about other things that are not things that you would normally disclose, things that hurt the credibility of the American government.
Yeah.
So she is one to watch. You have, other elements inside Washington right now that are pushing for UFO disclosure in the House. You have you know, basically a Senate Select Committee, individuals such as Anna Paulina Luna, who has declared she will get to the bottom of the UAP phenomenon. Uh, a few days ago, she went on the Joe Rogan Experience and talked extensively
Hmm.
about how she believes, based on the evidence she has seen, that these are not aliens from other planets, but these are interdimensional beings. She even cited and quoted from the book of Enoch.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, she is very knowledgeable, and watch that closely. She
Yeah.
is like a dog on a bone. She is really tracking this topic very, very closely. So there's a lot of people, and those are not everyone. Those are just a sample of people inside the government that are pushing for disclosure.
Yeah, I looked it up here just I was curious because I thought maybe he was, but Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, um, was not only a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but he was actually at one point vice chair of the Select Committee on Intelligence. Now,
Yeah.
again, I think that they are told certain things. I don't know that they necessarily know everything, but it seems like that they are informed of certain things that are going on. So it's just interesting that, to your point, of him picking people for the cabinet that are very pro. Now, the one you were just talking about that was on Rogan, does she have any ties to the Collins Group at all? That Christian sect that seems to be kind of underpinning a lot of this? Do you know of that at all?
I don't I don't think she does. She hasn't made any statement. In fact, she is pushing for disclosure. The Collins elite are trying not to have disclosure.
Yeah.
Um, so it doesn't seem like she's, a part of that agenda at all. She
Yeah.
kind of got looped into this early on when there was a couple of hearings. Early on, you had uh, Knoxville Congressman, what's his name, Tim.
Oh, yeah. I can't think of his last name,
He
but I
he's
know who you're talking about.
he's such a great interview to watch if you ever get a
Yeah.
chance to watch him. But he is over the Farragut, Tennessee area here. Um his name slips my mind for some reason, but yeah, he was one of the early ones that was really pushing for this. You had then Matt
Burchett.
Gates, yeah, Tim Burchett, that's right,
Mm-hmm.
Tim Burchett, congressman. And then you had Matt Gates, uh, who is no longer in Congress, but
Mm-hmm.
he and I believe it was Nancy Mace went to a military facility and demanded to see evidence of UFOs, and they were uh, stonewalled, and they pressed them to the point where they did indeed show them video and photo evidence
Oh wow.
of recorded UFOs, and they've talked about that at length. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, we find ourselves in unusual times
Yeah, we do.
where um, people want transparency, and there are some people in our government that also want transparency. But I will say this: I don't know how much longer they can keep the secrets. It would not surprise me if they put it back in the box for a few more years. That would not shock me. Um, I heard a quote. I don't know who said this, maybe George Knapp or uh, Ross Coulthard or somebody else said this, but basically that disclosure is impossible and disclosure is inevitable.
Mm.
And I believe that is really at the heart of the issue. The fact that the keepers of the secrets are always 3 or 4 steps ahead. But at the same time, I mean, how long can you really put it back in the box? How long can you really keep the secrets from a world that is so well connected and camera systems and
Yeah, right.
technology, AI? I mean, it just doesn't seem feasible to do that. Now, one reason that they would not keep it secret any longer, I believe, is because they are worried, and this is a real worry, that other countries such as China or Russia are beating us in the reverse engineering game. And the first country to crack the code,
Yeah.
uh, to really crack the technology, wins the game. I mean, you're talking about things that defy the law of physics, and so
Mm-hmm.
I think what the major uh, powers of this world are doing is they are all preparing for the next war, and they want to have an airspace superiority over the other countries. And so there is
Yeah.
a space race, if you will, to reverse engineer, back engineer these celestial devices, like FDR alluded to. And America, for many years, because we chose the secrecy path and we siloed everything, we really haven't gotten as far as other countries, it's reported. Um, And so our
Mm.
approach may change. The way that we try to use the technology, reverse engineer the technology may change to the point that we are now inviting uh, secular scientists in to study and help us understand the technology to catch up to the Russians or catch up to the Chinese. Um,
Yeah.
and in fact, there has have been some uh, whispers, even from Trump's technology advisor, that he said, quote, "We can now obliterate time and space." So what
Mm.
does that mean? Well, it sounds like, we have technology that is otherworldly. I mean, that's kind of what it sounds like to me.
Yeah.
So um, I'm sure that in all the investigation I've done into this topic, there are things that I could not even imagine because they have not leaked out in the public domain. There are probably uh, advances well beyond what we
Oh, I'm
may
sure.
even believe that have taken place in our government and also abroad.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things, like we've been messing with time and done times, we have declassified CIA files on how we've been monkeying with time now for decades, and it's fascinating doing remote viewing. And there's a lot of things out there that we actually have created tesseract devices to be able to do stuff, and it's insane. But as far as not being as far ahead of, or along as other countries, it's fascinating because it reminds me of kind of an anecdotal story with Bob Lazar, who's
Hmm.
a fascinating study if you want to really dive into some crazy story. Pick up his book Dreamland, which I would highly recommend anybody to read. But he shares a story in there about, here he is reverse engineering these craft, and they were actually partnering with Russian scientists, and they were all working on this together out in Nevada. And then one of the teams, because they're all very compartmentalized for secrecy, one of the teams made a major breakthrough, and they literally packed up all
Yeah.
the Russians and sent them back home. It's like, yeah, we're not going to share our
Yeah.
toys with you. Actually, get off you go. And so
Yeah.
it's just kind of an interesting anecdotal story. I want to get into, the back part of the book for our last bit of time together, which is really, I think, okay, what does all this mean from a Christian worldview perspective, right? But before we go there, one last thing I want to ask you on this topic before we kind of dive into that aspect of it is Project Bluebeam. So Project Bluebeam is allegedly this whole disclosure process, right? That they are working and slowly, like a frog in boiling water, working us up for eventual disclosure. What do you know of that? And how does that all kind of tie into this? Do you believe that? And do you believe that people like Elizondo are part of that, where it seems like they're whistleblowers, but maybe they've actually been tabbed for their portion of the disclosure, like project?
Yeah. And if that's the case, I don't blame them. They're simply doing their job,
Yeah.
working for the American government. And that makes sense. There has been steering historically with the UFO topic, whether it be with filmmakers or politicians. And so that would be in line with what is, taking place historically. Um, but yeah, Project Bluebeam, I don't really go a lot into that in my book. My
Yeah.
understanding of that is it essentially it was to fake an alien invasion. I mean that essentially is at the heart of Project Bluebeam. Um, and so we see whispers of that now. Avi Loeb has been on television every day for the past several weeks. He's a Harvard astrophysicist,
Oh,
um,
yes.
written several books, extraterrestrial, interstellar, and essentially there is a an object that is approaching Earth twice the speed of our fastest rockets, and it is called 3I Atlas.
Hmm.
I believe that's the title of it, 3I Atlas. And Loeb says that he has made a classification for approaching objects from 1 to 10. He calls it the Loeb scale. And 1 is prosaic, it's a rock in space. And then 10 would be extraterrestrial or technological. And he rates this on the Loeb scale at about a 4 currently. And so that has got the attention of a lot of people, but it ties back into this thought of, would our government try to fake an alien invasion?
Hmm.
Um, and I could see that. In my research, I came across some very disturbing things about my lab's military abductions, to where our own government is basically abducting people around the world that have enhanced abilities for remote viewing, for example. Some recent whistleblowers have actually come out and attested to this, that stumbled upon some of these sites overseas in the jungle. And I can't remember his name, but he basically says that they were, I think, octagon shaped craft. They were hovering just above the ground, and inside there were children. And so, um, later on, he learned from uh, a man by the name of Jake Barber, who is working for Skywatch right now. Skywatch is a group that is trying to classify UFOs and basically get one to land and study them.
Hmm.
Uh, but Jake Barber, was interviewed by Ross Coulthard on News Nation, and he was a part of the retrieval program. He retrieved eggs, alien eggs, if you will, craft that are egg shaped. Um, and he attested to this MyLab experience that people have because he knows it exists, where they are abducting people in ARVs or alien reproduction vehicles, and using them for their abilities and honing in their psychic abilities, if you will,
Yeah.
which is another topic in and of itself. But
Hmm.
um, many believe it's connected to the UFO topic. Um, but essentially, yeah, I would not be shocked if our government has faked alien invasions and are planning to fake alien invasions, even on a local scale or even on a global scale. Um, so I believe that's a real possibility. And Project Bluebeam is, many believe, kind of the origin of that concept.
Yeah. Yeah, the technology's there for it. We see the dangers of AI as far as what it can do from a creation perspective, and how it can really twist the realities of someone seeing things and hearing things. It's getting more and more convincing every day. It's kind of terrifying. While it could be a useful tool, like any tool in the hands of someone who wants to use it for something evil, it has incredible, disastrous
Oh, yeah.
powers at the ready. So, one of the things that you, like I said, you get into in the end of the book, and where I want to go now with our last bit of time together, and this is really probably the most important part of all of this, is what does this mean from a Christian worldview perspective, and how should we view all of this? All of these, are these extraterrestrials from another planet, or are they something else? And it's really interesting to me, and I will just share my own thoughts and feelings on this as kind of a launching point. When I started doing this show 2 years ago, I was probably in the camp that these were actual extraterrestrial beings from another planet. And ever since I started doing this show and having all of these conversations with various different people in their different fields, and being at the intersection point of all this and studying more of Scripture and learning more and having God reveal more to me, undoubtedly in my mind, these are not extraterrestrial beings. They're not from another world. I think the Anna Paulina Luna camp is dead on. I think she nailed it. These are interdimensional beings, and I think that they are actually demons. So that's my stance, but I want to open it up to you to kind of share your viewpoints too, and some of the things that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, I share that same conclusion. Uh, I have a backdrop. I have two previous books. You can see them behind me here. But I studied the supernatural aspect of Scripture in depth, and I had that backdrop coming into this UFO topic. And so I, like you, believe that what we're dealing with are deceptive entities, demons,
Yeah.
if you will, demonic, the powers of darkness, principalities and powers,
Mm-hmm.
fallen angels, the watchers, however you want to describe these beings. That is, in my mind, what we were dealing with. And um, the section I talk about abductions, for me, that was really pretty eye-opening. The fact that there have been various statisticians over the years, John Mack, you know, legendary John Mack, who
Yeah.
was a psychologist who studied this phenomenon, and others have followed in his footsteps.
Yeah,
And
who
they,
was not a UFO guy. He was not just.
yeah, not
I
at
think that
all.
actually lends a ton of
No,
credibility to his research, because you don't have someone coming in with a set paradigm and it's just looking at the statistics and facts for what they are.
exactly. Yeah, he was not a believer. And later on, he wrote a book, I think, entitled Believer. But essentially, they catalog the traumatic experiences, both psychologically, physically, emotionally, that people that are taken allegedly experience. And I talk about that in depth in the book. And so that, and for many other reasons, it screams demonic to me. It just oozes
Yeah.
with this is powers of darkness stuff. And quite honestly, it lines up with eschatology. It lines up with the end of time, the book of Revelation,
Yeah.
the four demonic equestrians, the riders on the various color horses in the book of Revelation, which in Gate of the Gods, I talked about how these are four Babylonian deities, and why that's the case. Um, and so I believe that we're experiencing this now. We're talking about it now because this was prophetic in that there would be an escalation of activity in the end of times. We know we're in the last days. We have been for 2,000 years. And in my mind, the powers of darkness are right on time. They're doing exactly what the prophets said they would do. Um, and so I believe that the disclosure movement is definitely part of that reality that the Bible, scripture is pointing us to that says, be ready, you know, many will be deceived.
Yeah. Yep.
Deception will be prevalent. It'll be global. It'll be worldwide.
And
In my
say hi,
mind, I'm
man.
like, yeah. And in my mind, I'm like, what could be so transformational
Yeah.
that it causes believers all over the globe to abandon their faith simultaneously?
Hmm.
It's not a war. Wars usually bring people closer to God. It's not a pandemic. Now that closed churches, but most people still have their faith, right? So, this topic is so ontologically shocking that many people will come to the conclusion that, hey, our government says we're not alone and that this galaxy is teeming with intelligent life. Um, and my Bible says nothing about that. Does that mean it's all bunk? Does that mean it's not true? And church leaders are going to be caught flat-footed. They're not going to know how to deal with it, how to answer it. There's another theory out there that these are future humans, the extraterrestrial model,
Hmm.
which essentially says that these entities have evolved over the next million years in the future, and that they or we have gray skin, bulbous heads, black eyes, frail bodies, and that it is a natural process of evolution. The Bible doesn't teach macroevolution,
Yeah, it
it
doesn't.
teaches creation. And
Hmm.
the problem with a million years from now is if that's true, then the end of time didn't occur. Then
Yeah.
eschatology didn't happen and it was all a lie. And so there's a lot of these theories that can threaten people's faith is what I'm trying to share today.
Yeah.
That if we are not well versed and ready, we could be among the deceived. So that is why I wrote the book, and I hope it helps.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's when you look at a lot of the interactions. I mean, first of all, the timeline for all of the abductions, because much to your point, I think that was the swing for me, because I'm looking at these things from through the lens of malevolency, and there's undoubtedly the conversations that I've had and the things that I've read, a malevolent, clear malevolent intent behind these abductions and these interactions with people. So when you figure that into the equation, it is not of God. If it's malevolent, it's not of God.
Right.
And with that, so if you have a race of beings that's from another planet that's doing this, then they too have experienced some kind of, I would think, fall from creation. So either way, you come back to the fact that these are not good creatures from another planet, right? They're just
Exactly.
not.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you have all of these stories of breeding programs that have been occurred. And you kind of had alluded to this a moment ago, where there seems to be a concerted effort to create hybrid beings, which is a time old tactic of Satan when we go back and we read some of the extra biblical texts like the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees, things that are found in Qumran, they're safe to consume. And you get more of the story back in Genesis, and one of the things that we can clearly see through that process is genetic manipulation, the attempt to pollute mankind. We have a genetic war that it begins right in Genesis 3. I mean, that's exactly what's happening there. So this is just tentacles from that event stretching throughout time in the enemy's attempt to pollute us. And Christ himself said, if he didn't cut the time short, there would be no one left. We would be so genetically destroyed that there wouldn't be any humans left to work, for him to come back and actually, claim. So I'm very much, I was happy to see, I was curious where you were going to go. And I kind of had an inkling that's where you were going to go kind of at the end of the book after you talk about all this. But I was happy to see that's where you went, because I think that's really important for Christians to get on board with what these things really are. And, another thing too is we have a lot of our brothers and sisters in Christ who are trying to summon these things and play with them. And they really shouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, man. It is not good. So please share your thoughts on that. I've gone on long enough.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that's part of the deception coming out of groups such as Skywatcher, uh, Dr. Greer's CE5 program,
Yeah.
basically a model for contact, how to do that, how to initiate that. And that is the narrative being pushed, I believe, in some circles, is that these are at least benevolent and we should reach out to them. We owe it to ourselves uh, to reach out to them in the heavens and invite them into our life. And if you just go back and read the Old Testament, you see how dangerous that was.
Hmm.
Yahweh, Israel's God, was continually warning them about the necromancers and
Yeah.
inviting these spirits and these demons into their life, and that's why the first two commandments and the Ten Commandments basically allude to that.
Yeah. That's
Don't
right.
don't mess with these entities. Don't get involved with them. And so now we see that history is repeating itself here in modernity. We are finding ways to make contact once again and be deceived all over again.
Yeah.
So
That's
if
right.
you are listening and you believe in Jesus, do not by any means, try to make contact with any of these protocols. Just don't do it.
Amen. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, when you go back and you look at the history of the Old Testament, you made a great point. The Assyrian destruction of the northern tribes. I mean, the fact that we had a split after Solomon in the Old Testament of northern and southern kingdoms was because at the end of his life, Solomon turned to necromancy and to idol worship and to worshiping all of these other entities that he knew he shouldn't be getting into. And so we have the fracturing of the kingdoms, but the warning of the prophets over and over and over again is to not worship this stuff and not interact with this stuff. And the people don't listen. So we have the northern kingdom get wiped out by the Assyrians, and then we have the southern kingdom wind up getting wiped out by the Babylonians and taken into exile. And, it's just echoes throughout time of the warning that has been laid out for us over and over and over again throughout the entire Bible of staying away from this stuff. So, yeah, this was a great
Yeah.
talk, man. I really appreciate you coming on and spending time with me. And if you guys have enjoyed this talk with Tyler, definitely want to pick up his book, The Liberty Code. You can actually click on your screen to get that. You can look down in the show notes, or you can head over to the website, thewordatwarmedia.com, click on guests. He'll have his own tab set up over there with all the links to not only this book, but also his other books. So definitely want to check that out. Well, we're going to move on to our exclusive members only portion of the discussion today. So if you'd like to be part of that, you're going to want to become a member of the show and help support me and help support the war. I would really appreciate that. Head to thewordatwar.supercast.com to start your free 7-day trial today. You're going to get some awesome perks for doing that and help support the show at the same time. And if you've enjoyed this conversation with Tyler today, check out Rungs of Disclosure, the episode that I did with renowned pastor and UFO researcher L.A. Marzulli. Until next time.